by combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne.
We're right along here with Ransom Godwin every Thursday night, 10 p.m. to midnight, keeping you moving through the end of the day, wherever you are on this beautiful blue planet. So, as we choose doorways into 2024, many a mystic school, many a modern idea of a hologram that we're living in, bending reality, morphing reality, we're going to have to step into one of the doorways. Will we step into the one chosen for us through the media that creates a world of darkness, or will we unite as humanity and step through the door that breaks us free of the chains of the bondage that we've been under for the last several thousand years or 150 years here in the United States? So as we move forward into 2024, this seems to be the year. This is it. There's going to be a couple things lining up. I'm going to throw my end of it, and then, Ransom's got a few ideas, and we'll come somewhere in the middle. Now, for me, focusing on the food and understanding these four gas giants, the way they are going to align themselves in October of 2024. You would expect disruptions in weather patterns, especially in the harvest season, closer to then. So you would need an excuse in advance why the planting was disrupted, or there's not enough food, or there's substantially down on the yields, and then we have the Red Sea occurring right now to really knock out the ability to deliver all types of agricultural implements and necessities. Also, if we look at the economy, I was looking at Ravi Farber tonight, talking about, looks like October is when we get a crossover. He was working with somebody who's a physicist and astrophysicist that understood numbers and put some charts together. Listening to Jim Willey, also talking about having to fund another $7 trillion in U.S. dollars for our debt to keep our government moving, plus the interest payments, all by, say, October of this year as well, another $7 trillion. That's clipping on at nearly $1 trillion a month. And as we look forward of, more and more countries trading outside the dollar, settling with their own natural resources or settling with their own currencies, or sometimes they're swapping gold between each other. And that's another facet of things. So we got climate, we got food, and then what else would we have? Society. So what do you think society is going to bend as? The school of fish is being pushed to fight each other. But imagine when the school of fish turns and says, you know what? We've had enough of you trying to direct us to fight each other. And then it's game over. So here I am traveling in Europe, 6 hours ahead of y'all. It's 4 a.m. here to start tonight's show. Since I've been here to the same country before in Croatia, I had some notes from the field, if you will. But I want to let Ransom jump in and, get a head start on his predictions for 2024. It's just this, I think, is the pivotal year. And when you look back in the last 1,000 years or 500 years, this is one of those years of pivot that society will choose, civilization will choose for itself which direction. And believe me, the darkness will not go easily into the night. So we talk about hidden history, disappeared chapters of history, distorted time in history. Perhaps we're experiencing another one because they don't want you to know there's a pattern. Because I talked to Mark A. Carpenter, and he was telling me that his research of following this cabal around the planet, which has been here for the last 7,000 years, it seems that they come to this point every single time, but they try to overstep their bounds. and they're literally overthrown and have to leave and go to a different area of the planet. Well, this time they're everywhere on the planet. So they're going to have to step off the planet for a minute before they're going to be able to come back again. And perhaps this is the reason that they talk about 1,000 years of no war, 1,000 years of light, because they're going to be nowhere. But it takes the combined effort of all humans on the planet to just say no. And we'll talk about ancient history tonight, too. So, Ransom, I'm glad you're here. What do you think about 2024?
I think 2024 is going to be a catch-up game for civilization because we're at, the more I think about it, and I kind of covered this Saturday, we are looking at a world that has already passed by. The visual idea of the world, the understanding of what's going on of the world for the most part for the population is already passed by, and they don't realize it yet. And kind of like my point being, they have robots literally deployed on most of the major streets of the U.S. already. Now, everybody jokes because they're these little R2-D2 style, and they've been mistreated before. If you remember, they put them out in San Francisco and they got covered with feces and people kicked them over and, things like that. But they're not really there to do anything other than incrementalize the idea of the new world that is taking place that you're not used to or you don't believe is at that point yet. And, a few years ago, right here on this show, we had to tiptoe around subjects because of a thing that was going around the world. And a lot of people had theories about that thing. And some of those theories involved, little tiny machines, smaller than the eye could see, that might be in the body doing things. And I pointed out at the time that the accumulation of different compounds and elements into the human body over time, like let's say plastics, carbon, things made of carbon, things like that, heavy metals, once inside the body, if you had the right mechanism, you could create technology, i.e. chips and other things inside of the body without having them necessarily implanted. Now, here's a new article from Study Finds. Let me share that with everybody. And this, now talking about a different topic, is where they admit the point in which technology is right now. Revolutionary nanodrones target and eliminate cancer cells. So this is talking about a South Korean research firm that has created these so-called nanodrones. And if you've noticed, they also in South Korea are now playing with, room temperature semiconductors, right? So levitation is now on the field as far as admitting that it's possible to the general public. And this is an article, when you get into it, it talks about the technology where you could send small little tiny machines inside of a body to do different tasks. Now, they're saying it's for a specific task, but keep in mind that one tool can be used for numerous different things. And that's kind of where we're at. It's a catch-up game with the public to find out, oh, you mean they put that in this food now? Oh, you mean that chemical is bad for me? Oh, they really don't have my best interest in heart. And I'm looking through the headlines, and it's exactly as we predicted. All the countries around the world are taking sides in the upcoming conflict. And the way that they're doing that is through the monetary system. So now there's two main monetary systems, and there can be only one, as they say, like on Highlander, right? And you're seeing people switching back and forth. So now all kinds of countries, including former allies to the United States, like Saudi Arabia, is now switching to the BRICS. And then you see other people that were in the BRICS, like Argentina, switching out of it and going back to the U.S. petrodollar. So what we're seeing all around the world is the upcoming event. This event that they're creating may coincide with some kind of natural event. I'm not sure. We sure are, looking like the way the sun's been behaving, that we're going to continue to see volcanic activity, earthquakes, etc. For this, probably, who knows, at least for the short term, but maybe in the long term, depending on which cycle the sun's actually in. And that being said, they're setting it up right now for a whole total new system, and people aren't getting what's really going on. And when you start looking at it from a bigger picture, like a globe, instead of your country or your neighborhood or what you have to, you got to pay bills, you're thinking about that stuff. They know that in your little world, it's hard to think about all of the moving parts of this mechanism going on. And when I look at it, what I see is nations taking sides, forced mass migration through different means, war. Some of it's real. People are running from war, like in Africa and stuff. But in other places where there really is no war, but there's about to be a war, millions of people have already fled those areas and moved into other areas like Europe. So all of the Western world, the United States, Australia, all of Europe has been intaking millions upon millions of people to be at the right place at the right time. That thing is going to be some kind of conflict that involves everybody, and inevitably their dogmas will also be involved in that. And no one realizes that when this happens, that will cut the entire world's trade down. And that's already happening. You see articles about, like we predicted, that the straits around the world, access points to different oceans, shortcuts between going around the world and delivering goods are now being clogged up or shut down, or are about to be absorbed into a conflict area. Which, what does that mean for you and your bills? Well, it means that although the price of gas may be going down just a little bit right now, but nowhere near like what it's been in the past, that's about to skyrocket. That's going to inevitably skyrocket, that because our monetary system is partly intertwined with that. And now we have an entire planet debating which monetary system that they're going to go in, but it all ends in a central bank, central currency to run every last human on the planet. And the people are just slowly catching on to these programs are going when they're almost complete. They're almost done with the program. So they're already moving on to new steps while we're catching up to the old steps. And in this new year, you're going to be offered ever more 2 different lifestyles, 2 different choices. A completely black and white world where you do not get to take the path that you want to take, per se, or the path, with the least obstacles or any of that stuff. They want you to choose this way or that way. And we're going to have to figure out which side is actually beneficial for humankind. So they're not even giving you one of those choices. I mean, it's not like here's a good thing, here's a bad thing, pick one. They're only showing you the bad one. So we kind of have to, realize that there is this other path away from transhumanism, away from global debt slavery, and away from a tyrannical transhuman future that's really, really a nightmare. And you see that future already spinning its tentacles around the apparatuses that run the world right now. And they're pushing for a new civil war. I mean, it's so funny. And I remember we talked about this on this show. When I saw them throw Albert Pike's statue down in Washington, D.C., being the, 33rd degree Freemason, very popular literature that he wrote that all Freemasons were reading at the time. He was respected by all the Freemasons. He was part of their clique. When I saw them tear that down, I knew that they were going in a new direction for sure in America. And that was the signal to the world that the Freemason Judeo-Christian setup that they've been playing, they're going to let that burn. And they're going to allow Marxism to take control of these areas. And it was so obvious to me. And what have you seen since then? The erasing of history. So although you don't probably agree with the statues or what the people that are on the statue stand for, or whatever your thing is, they tore it down to where now it doesn't exist. And when I realized that they were going to tear down the reconciliation statue of all of the statues of the Civil War. Tear down the one that was representing the reunification and peace of the U.S. to become a whole independent one government again, a whole nation. They're going to get rid of that. So they're erasing all of these things, but at the same time, they're pushing you the same ideas from back in those times. And it's like mashup of World War II and the Civil War that they're trying to feed the American people, while in the backdrop, millions and millions of people are coming in. A lot of them not what you think. So I know a lot of people have a stereotype of who's coming across the border, and that's not necessarily true. If you've been paying attention, you know that they're coming from all walks of life, from all places on the U.S., all places in the world. And some of those places don't like us. They don't like our country, and they're more than willing to set up little groups, maybe splinters of their civilization where they're at, if you want to call it that, little cells of operation here. To cause what no one's been able to do ever, which is totally destabilize the American people. And there's a reason for that. Number one is freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the First Amendment, the right to press, the right to convey ideas. And number two was, well, everybody knows number two, that's the one to back the first one up. And as a famous person said in the U.S., there's three forms of voting. And what they're going to do is take away those three forms of voting from you, and you'll know when they're gone. The number one way to vote is with your mouth. It's your opinion, your freedom of speech to voice your ideas, your beliefs, and your disbeliefs or disagreements or grievances with anyone, especially the government. Number two would be that ballot box that you're supposed to drop your individual vote in to vote and cast to take participation in the democratic system of the constitutional republic we live in. And if all else fails, of course, there's the ammo box. And that's coming from, a very famous person. I know a lot of people know who that is, but I'm not going to say it because it kind of feeds into the propaganda. So they're trying to give you this idea of a Civil War type scenario. They're making movies about civil wars. They're giving a predictive programming up the wazoo about a failed United States, a failed Western world. But at the same time, they're not stopping their investments. They're not stopping rearranging their assets, resources. They're not stopping from building bunkers because they know something's coming. So I think that's where we're at. We've been giving a choice that's unseen. It's an occult choice. You have to find out about it yourself. And kind of like the Masonic way, you have to ask or figure it out on your own or have initiative to figure out what the other option is. And the only option that they're trying to provide is the end of humanity, the end of carbon dioxide, the end of farming, the end of eating meat, the end of growing meat. That's what they're talking about. And they're not even hiding it anymore at this point. They're leaving it upon the ignorance of society to actually think that killing yourself or killing your offspring or, like volunteering for suicide as they're pushing in all of these different countries around the world now. And, and I said it a long time ago that was going to expand. And now to the north of us in Canada, there's several reasons. You can do it because you're mentally ill, because you're addicted to drugs, or you have a terminal illness. And that is going to spread where they offer it for poverty. And once one country or two countries do it, more countries will do it. Everything on the plate is about depopulation. And mark my words, all they are doing right now is setting up in the background while everybody's obsessing over this fake list that came out. That's no one's ever going to get convicted of or anything. So I don't know why everybody's excited. In the backdrop, we're setting up for a major conflict around the world. It's almost inevitable at this point.
I would add a fourth choice onto that. Voting would be with your money. But with central bank digital currency, you'll only be able to use it in certain places. And since we don't want to go to some places, maybe those will be the only ones open that will accept said new transaction medium, especially if you want to feed your family. So now we can say we don't want to buy the products and just bankrupt a place, a country, a company, a brand. What if that's not true or able to in the future, where you can literally only spend your money there, even though you don't like the politics, and then whatever direction they take, it won't matter because it's the only two places allotted or allowed to spend your digital currency to purchase food. The Sam's Club, Costco, Dynamic Duo, and then Walmart. And those are the only places you'll be able to get food. Everything else will have been closed. And then at what point do you boycott a store? You literally couldn't. So a couple parallels here. Oh, and first thing, since I'm traveling right now and I sign up for the warnings, because in Serbia right now there's a lot of problems because they used the U.S. voting machines, and the candidate who was supposed to win landslide, like 90% populist person, was going to take on corruption, do a lot of changes. That person had a 90% of the population was going to vote for that guy, and he ended up losing. So they're like, whoa, something's wrong here. Then it come out, find out seems that their election machines were also having some problems there. So there's just been on the street since that time a few weeks back. That's going on as a warning here. So I'm talking about U.S. citizen warnings, urgently advising citizens to leave Lebanon. If you're in Lebanon, I'm sure you also have the emergency warning to leave Lebanon immediately, like yesterday. Do not pack, go. Basically, grab your passport, and that's all you take and get out. It's getting that bad that fast. There's a couple of those around right now. Obviously, the other one's Yemen, et cetera, but ones that are sort of brewing on the background that are about to flare off. Exit Lebanon messages and completely avoid anything in Serbia right now. So you can see the powder keg continues to spin and boil in other places that just come on and off the radar pretty quickly. Because Serbia was our third point exit point. So if you have a plan A, a plan B, and you always need to have a plan C. Well, our tertiary exit point is gone now because that was it. Now what? Okay, it's like that in life. Things change. So if something were to go down and we had to bail and we couldn't get through Hungary, or we couldn't get through Albania down to Greece or something, okay, maybe we have to go to Bosnia, Herzegovina. I did want to visit the Bosnian pyramid, but currently they're not open because it's low season. So I'm trying to write a couple emails to see when they're going to be opening again. It's in a town called Vasko, Vasko, and that's where the Bosnian pyramid is. And I did not know how much incredible new discoveries they've made this.
Think you cut out there, Mr. DuByne. Make sure it's not just my feed.
Under their 7,000 to 8,000 years.
There he is. He's coming back. Maybe.
Yep. Yeah, that's strange how it dropped off. The internet might have dropped and then reconnected. So
there you go.
Shutting it all down. And it was weird how it dropped when I started talking about the Bosnian pyramids, wasn't it? Interesting. So, Ransom, I just want to make sure that you can hear me. Are we good?
Yes, sir. You're loud and clear now.
Okay, excellente. So shutting it all down seems to be the trend on a graph. You can look at the individual ideas or the individual events, but Ransom and we try to find those events on a line, on a graph, scatter graph somewhere. And instead of just pointing one of them, to try to find other events around it that then can make a larger dot that's more, I guess, clear to see, that allows you to get a far better gauge of where the trend is going. So the trend would be shutting it all down. Now, I'm over here on the Adriatic Sea at the moment. They're talking about higher prices coming in because they have to reroute everything down around the Cape of Good Hope and then bringing it through the Mediterranean, then bring it finally all the way over here. which doesn't really make sense. I mean, they're on the sea, cheapest delivery routes on the planet pretty much, but now that everything's 3 weeks behind. Haven't seen many things on the store shelves disappear, but for me, an outsider, I just don't know what's the normal inside a store shelf and how greatly this is really affecting anything that we're seeing. Also, as of January 1st, Croatia became officially an EU member. So as of that day, there was no more local currency called the kuna, and everything moved into the euro. But if you had any kuna left, you had to go to the central bank to change them. And when I say central bank, I mean like the Federal Reserve, print the money for the country, central bank office in Zagreb, which freaks me, blows my mind how you can go change your money in the place they print the money, which for us is like any top security, top secret security to even get in the grounds of that building. Yet this is where you go to change your money here for the final days. So how many people got stranded and lost millions? How many hundreds of millions of dollars are in the wild that are now worthless, worth literally zero? And at the same time, everything got really, really expensive by converting over to the euro. And talk on the street is, how expensive things are getting. People are disgruntled by how quickly the prices have risen. And if you think it's just in America where things are getting more expensive, it's not. It's literally everywhere. And seeing how this conversion of the EU and the euro, a lot of people point the finger at Russia and go, oh, Russia's trying to gobble up and take Ukraine. Oh, they're trying to overthrow. They're trying to jump in and colonize another country. Well, I could point to the euro and say the EU is absolutely a behemoth of invasion economically coming in and eating nations from the inside out. I think probably conservatively 25 to 30% of the wealth of this nation has been stolen by the EU just in the leading up to this time right now. There's new taxes introduced because of a certain percentage of the old tax that was on sales tax, just a general tax of 25% when you purchased anything. Anywhere from 3 to 5% of that now goes back to the EU for their running costs. The EU central bank requires homage payment. So then what do they have to do? Well, then the government here introduces a new 3% tax to try to make up for the lost revenue that was stolen by the EU. Everybody can point out and point fingers and go, oh, China, they're trying to overtake this country. Oh, they're going to take Taiwan. Oh, they're going to try to go get Cambodia. They want to steal and jump in and colonize Myanmar. But when you look at the EU, they're the worst of the worst. They do it openly in your face and say it's progress, but all they're doing is impoverishing. They're like the Borg. After traveling here, I can actually say that the EU is the closest thing to the Borg that we've seen in Star Trek episodes that I've witnessed in my life. The overtaking of a nation and turning it into itself. So they went from a couple of weeks ago to having freedom to be able to get onto the net. So I want to try to go to RT News today because I'm trying to, anybody who's supporting me on Patreon, thank you. Hang loose for a second. I got updates coming. I've been working all day to try to get slides ready for our next video. But I wanted to go to RT News and it's blocked now. But last week it wasn't blocked. But this week it is blocked because last week they weren't part of the EU. But this year, now they have to abide by all these internet regulations and all these banking things. And there's forbidden websites and you can't go to RT News inside the EU. But last week you could. And then it's just all these free speech things, the platforms that are going to have to shut down or be curtailed. I would look at the EU as a virus across the planet, which needs to be disassembled and deconstructed, and people need to come back to their own. Because when we were here last, they had some of the best calamari, and I don't know if anybody's a fan of calamari. Very lightly breaded, fried in some of the best olive oil. And the way, I don't know, whatever they did, they had some sort of like vacuum that pulled all the oil out of it. And it was some of the crispiest, freshest, most succulent, sweet calamari I've ever had in my life. So I wanted to get that when it came back. So I got it, and the guy was telling me because of the new EU admission that starting this 2024, they're going to have to start buying. They're forced to buy squid from Spain and have it moved by rail over here to sell the same seafood they could sell bought from their local fishermen on the coast. But because of the EU interoperable or inter-exchange trade organization commitments that only about 10%, and now it varies with industry, so don't put my feet to the fire. There's a full list of, some of them are 12%, some of them are 15%, some of them are 9%, of how much of your local industry can be bought and resold in your own nation again. So this, I'm looking at it going, you guys talking black till you're blue in the face, flapping your lips about global warming, yet you want this nation that sits on a sea coast, that has its own fishing fleets, to then buy fish and shrimp and squid from Spain and Portugal all the way across Europe and then run it by rails over here. And I'm thinking, how many other things are going to be like that? And again, the costs that would increase with that. And the costs here have doubled and tripled for many a thing. Now, this is one of the most affordable, best countries to ever travel in. I mean, you could, sit down and have like a rib dinner with a few beers and it was like $15. Or you could have some seafood and, that previous calamari that I talked about with a beer and everything would be like $7. But now the things are bumping up in price. They're coming up in price. And then, the real price increases haven't hit this country yet. It's just started because of the transition into 100% euro this week. But now they're going to have to start to reprice everything in euros moving forward. So why would I tell you that? Because you brought it up, Ransom. You talked about some of the conditions seem as if we're dropping back in time to around the civil or post-Civil War era. And I was watching Rafi Farber today, and he brought out these crazy charts. And when I say crazy, I mean literally insane charts. Because you and I, when we think about, the takeover of our banking system, okay, Croatia's banking system was just taken over by the European Central Bank, and they're going to get shagged this way from Sunday on their money and monetary policy, and it's just going to be an impoverishment fest as this country moves into the new monetary system with unelected oligarchs and unelected dictators called the EU. So the Civil War, if we go back, 1865, it finishes. But I will have you jump to the year 1870. So everything we're seeing today really began in 1870. And why would I say that? This is going to give you a quick economic lesson on how they moved to the gold standard to now control the money. Because prior to 1870, from say like the chart that he gives starts in like 1750, we in the United States had a bimetallic standard, meaning that we used both gold and silver to be able to transact, purchase, buy, settle debts, etc., all the way until the year 1870. And what did they do? In 1870, they took us off the bimetallic standard and only moved to a gold standard, which by very definition put gold as the only thing that was recognized as debts settlable, and the gold fell off, and that's why it moved from its traditional 15-to-1 ratio up to 20-to-1 almost instantly. If you're going to change how many ounces of silver, it would be to 1 ounce of gold. As soon as they decoupled the bimetallic standard and said we're moving to a gold-only standard for the government issuance of debt, the government issuance, the government operations, the way that you can pay your debts is only going to be in gold. Silver doesn't count anymore. That's great. You paupers down there can use silver for your packs of gum, but it's not going to be used at any level of any, let's say, larger business as we would understand corporations, governments, that only gold from that point. And I didn't realize that was the key to capturing the entire monetary system, was have only the representation as a derivative of the U.S. dollar being a derivative of gold set in stone with the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. Until that point, that's why there were so many financial collapses along the way until 1913 came up, and then J.P. Morgan had to bail out the U.S. government in 1912 and 11, and then that led to the creation where they could then control the money issuance and printing was part of the bailout deal. Well, had they stayed on a bimetallic standard, we never would have had that collapse phase from, say, 1880 through, the early 1900s. The reason there was a collapse is because the disconnect of being able to pay for goods and services with two different monies that were accepted back through thousands of years of time. Now it was only gold. And it became so much more expensive for people to obtain the gold because day one after the decoupling, or probably week one after that, like I say, the traditional amount was 15.5 to 1. So it took 15.5 ounces of silver to obtain 1 ounce of gold. Well, a week later, you're up above 20. Months later, it was 22 to 1. So you just suddenly, even though you had physical metal, you were losing money hand over fist. You lost 25% of your value. And this really is what started to set it in, because silver was demonetized at that point. And the only thing from the inflation era beginning was then gold. So to control the entire monetary system, it can only be a one exchange to one. So once it was a quote unquote gold standard,
And I guess he got cut off again. So we will be back right as soon as he comes back. And he was talking about, or I was also, the similarities between now and the Civil War. And actually, this is the first time that we've had two incumbent presidents since like 1892 or something like that. So that's another thing that they're just going to keep pushing, is that two-party system of old. And they're just not going to stop. While it seemingly is both parties are doing the same thing. It's stagnation, inflation, because we all know that the banks are running the show. So it doesn't matter which side you kind of get on there. What are the central banks about to do? And it seems like they're converting over to this last version of money that we're going to have on Earth, unless you're trading in gold, because there are going to be black markets that open up because gold is real wealth, and it always has been. That's probably the only way that anyone will get around the new system, is by using heavy metals and barter. And then when you think about how much surveillance is now done by everything, it's going to be really hard to have a barter system in place. And speaking of that, not that it's a new thing, but the FBI continues to raid Amish farmers all the time. Here's an article from Adam Salazar. State raids Amish organic farm selling raw foods to private buyers. Once again, because food is a weapon. So if you can stop people from getting food, then it is a weapon, especially if we can't just eat the organic food that old style preparers, farmers, ranchers, etc. make things. Are you really free and a free citizen? Are you a free person in the world? Let me check out DuByne.
Back again.
All right. Sweet. No, it's not. It's like right when you get to the good points, you cut off there.
I was just saying we've been sold a sham of goods in the way they've reconstructed financial history to think that the Federal Reserve was responsible, and the only thing that was really keeping us, because they pre-programmed us. Nobody's been alive since 1870. Like, I know zero people that are alive right now that were adults that could understand the transition of money. There's zero people left on this planet that are alive at that age. Right. So they've been selling us this fake bill of goods, a gold standard. But that's the way they stole the money supply, because it was originally a bimetallic system. So what are they going to sell everybody again? Oh, we got to go back to the gold standard and make sure that our money's sound again. No, we have to go back to a bimetallic system to make sure our money remains sound again. If you can be gold only, then you can control and manipulate the system from day one again. You don't have to wait those umpteen years from 1870 to 1913. You just start day one because you made it into gold standard again without the silver as the base also. See, that history is so murky, and that's only 150 years ago, 151 years. I mean, you look at go back 500. Geez, my knees. That was my climactic wind up on that thought before I got cut off the air there.
Sorry, no, I was looking for the article I had there. It's about a book called The Final Countdown to the CBDC. And it pretty much describes what we've been talking about. Like, for example, down here, this is supposed to be a fictional book based on the scenarios that are going on now. The Price of Submission is one of the titles to the paragraph in this article. But here I found a passage from it where it says that the CBDCs, New York City, once bustling with life and energy, had been transformed into a dystopian nightmare. The United States' previous symbol of freedom and democracy had succumbed to a digital tyranny. Despair and hopelessness filled the city with the relentless onslaught of propaganda on the airwaves and the constant hum of drones overhead casting dark, oppressive shadows on the streets below. I guess that's
that's 2024 any city.
Right. So that's an excerpt from their book, but obviously I haven't read this book or anything, but I could tell from just that little bit of it that it's covering exactly what we're talking about. It's this incremental system that will just be put in place, and people will not know what happened when all of a sudden they're telling them, you know what, that paper money's not worth nothing, or your property deed is not as secure as you thought it was, things like that. And the more Marxist we let local government get allows the more national government to get that way too. And we can see where they're going because we can listen to what they want. And it's a own nothing, not really be happy. That's kind of sarcasm, like, war is peace and freedom is slavery kind of mentality. But you're going to own nothing, be happy, and eat bugs. And I'm thinking the people that they're getting used to that idea. I mean, think about this just on a basic concept. Bugs are a last resort. Bugs have always been known to be like the last thing you would eat if you were in a survival scenario, or, any movie that used to show the end of the world, people were eating bugs because it was like the only thing. Like, for example, that movie, The Road. They were so happy to find a couple dead moths in the windowsill to eat it for some protein. And then here comes the world elite telling you, you know what, farming's bad, meat's bad, you're bad, breathing's bad, owning a home's bad, you're racist, we need to move millions of people to where you live. You need to stop living like you're living. And then when you sit there and think about it, what are all the extra people going to eat if you're shutting down the farming simultaneously as upping the population of those areas? And then telling you to eat bugs. Well, maybe they're just prepping a whole new generation of people for the idea that only the rich, elite, technocratic few are allowed to eat meat and own property and be happy. But you can report to the nearest factory so that you can start repairing the drones and the machines that make things. And here's your bug sandwich, or your protein bar like they had in the Snowpiercer. When they looked in there to see what they had been eating, that's all it was crickets, cockroaches, and things like that. And now you got I hear all these people arguing, oh, we used to eat bugs for thousands of years. No, people ate bugs when they had no other choice. Stone Age cultures learned how to cook bugs and eat them because it's a source of protein that they found where they live. And believe me, if they had beef, they would eat beef more often. That's just a fact. And the whole idea that everything about humans needs to be shut down and simultaneously setting up for a world war. And then whenever you start looking at the death statistics for the last couple of years, combined with the dropping lifespan of human beings, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about. And, maybe it's woo-woo, maybe it's not. But the years with the least amount of sunspots seemingly producing the people with the longest lifespans. And we talked about this before. It seems like every time that happens, they give all of these trials and tribulations for the people that would have been born after those years to grow up in a destabilized world to, like diminish their lifespan as well. And believe it or not, even though we have for the first time, more people coming into the country than being born. Think about that. Now we're matching other Western countries like Italy and many others, where more people come in than the amount of people that are being born. And the fertility rates are, dropping through the floor at low levels. Not only that, men are becoming sterile. You can point your fingers at this thing or that thing or the other thing or what it is, but it only happens in the countries that seem to be targeted for turnoff, which is the Western world. You don't see them pushing these narratives really in other places. And when they've tried, it's kind of backfired. And now, we're finding out that maybe the point in which we understand genetics is further than they've been leading on, because, I've been reading the papers as they come out, throughout the years. First, they said Neanderthal was our ancestor. Then they said, oh, wait, no, it's a different species. Oh, wait, you know what? It's been around 100,000 years before us. And now the papers are circling back around to say that, no, Neanderthals are just regular humans, which, I don't need to tell you would throw history on its head. Of what they're saying, because what they're saying is that human beings have been doing things and building empires in a repeated cycle of flourishment and destruction for hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions of years, which would explain a lot of mysteries around the world. And our most recent one was at the end of the Hunger Dryas that flooded the world. And it seems like a little group of cultists and occultists got together and found all the knowledge that there was to be found, disseminated it around the world. And then, since then, we've had several other cycles pushing us down. And I think the elite that have been the continual chain of information through these secret schools, secret libraries, etc., they know exactly what's going on in the cycle. And if they're moving their pieces in accordance to that cycle, then I think we should listen to them and listen to what they're saying. And when they're saying they want to reduce the population and they want to get rid of us down to net zero, that they mean it. And that's exactly what you're seeing. And I think that Americans are sadly mistaken if they think that these things cannot touch them that they see happening around the world. Not only combat zones, but famines, droughts, destabilization, outbreaks, things that can turn normal, comfortable life up on its head within a matter of weeks. And we hopefully not, but I think America's about to get to see some of that, because the world elite have set it up for us to be the next in a series of nations that they destroy so that they could profit off the rebirth.
Hey, brought me back to my childhood school lunch days there, speaking of a few things. Remember back in the day, we'd trade like a Twinkie for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Well, the kids in the modern era are going to have to trade their cockroach milk for a mosquito burger. This is the kind of world I don't want kids growing up in that world. Cockroach milk is a little much for me, We weren't never intended to eat such things or drink such things. And I'll tell you, Ransom, that term electromagnetic birthing, there's really some validity to it. So you look at it, who's that, Munger and Soros and those guys who live, they each live to be 99 years old. And Berkshire Hathaway as well with Warren Buffett, he's up in his late 90s also. Think about that. They were all born in the same low solar cycle. And that's how they extended these lifetimes. And think about all the wars that come up. World War I, immediately right after that. World War II, and then where do we sit now? We're coming into, and we'll drop off this solar cycle into the lowest of electromagnetic activity on our sun in some 400 years plus. So if you think somebody can live to be 99 years average or 100 years average on an extremely low amount of solar activity, circa 1920s, what do you think would happen if you were to give it the lowest solar activity in 400 years? The average lifespan would probably, 120? Now think about that for a second, how much that would bend society. If you had an entire generation that would live to be average of 120 years old, but then subsequently every generation born after them would be lower and lower and lower in the average lifespan, where it would bring it back into the 80s again. So you'd have this one like outlier generation that would live to be 100 and 125 years old on average, but everything else after that, they would all die when they're 80. There would be a lot of questions asked, like, whoa, what happened? And I'm just wondering if we can build like the Hadron Collider and stuff. Do you think it's possible that there are rooms built or buildings or facilities that can manipulate the electromagnetic field, that the elite and some of their planned pregnancies, the woman would move into that facility for the full 9 months of gestation, and they could tweak the magnetic field within the room and guarantee 100% using science that that child born would live to be 100. You know, that nothing technology anymore is past the possibility. And, you know, we could talk about the great take-in and the mortgage bail-in when we come back. But what about the Bitcoin time traveler? Because you were talking, that quote that you wrote there or read about New York City and the envisioned future of an impoverished world living off bugs and straw huts for pretty much everybody. The Bitcoin time traveler, he popped back and talked about something called the Bitcoin citadels, were described perfectly with what you described as New York City as the complete opposite of a full collapse society. Drugs, crime, malnutrition, disease, just like a full collapse society living within remnants of the old previous, what we understand as functional society. But within that, there were these bastions that were technological, all robot driven, all robot controlled. And even like 0.3 of a Bitcoin was enough to, or was it 0.03 Bitcoin was enough to allow you entry in there for the basic rudimentary daily living and what would be considered opulence and king and queen compared to the outside world. And a full Bitcoin would provide you with something that we consider of the elite of today's lifestyle for the rest of your life. But the thing is, you had to exist in these Bitcoin citadels. And when I say citadel, they were, regions. They weren't just a mountaintop with a big fort on it. They were full regions with big walls around them. Then you start to look at some of these future dystopian movies where there's always these areas with giant walls around places. So whether the Bitcoin time traveler is talking about, we are at this point now where there's going to be a drastic shift in the society where previous workings of normal things are going to constrict more. But that's only in the Western world. Because you got to think about all the talk of the BRICS and the BRICS nations and the movement and the seemingly massive growth now in monies moving over to, what was previously considered developing nations or less developed nations, third world nations. There's a ton of money moving in there now. And as I've been trying to work on my Patreon video for this next update, the huge amount of money that is flowing into Africa and the amount of roads being constructed right now is very much similar to the New Deal, what you would consider in America during the Great Depression, to put all these people to work, to get them on dam building projects, road building projects, railway projects. Like, as I see it so far, they're dissecting Africa into several networks of north-south roads, which are all being financed by China and Russia. And I look at it and I go, damn, those are some fine looking roads. I understand. I know what a good road or a bad road looks like. Is it, they boiled up a 55-gallon drum of tar and then poured it one at a time? Or did we use real, what we consider like asphalt equipment and then rollers after that to give it more of a smooth surface? It's the latter. They're bringing in huge equipment and doing like double lane highways all the way through, not single lane, double lane with medians, etc. All the way from Eritrea and that area next to the New Renaissance Dam that cuts all the way down to Kenya. And they are planning for it to run the coast all the way down to South Africa. And from South Africa, again, they're going to shoot one literally straight going through Zimbabwe up all the way to through Chad, right to where the edge of eventually popping out at Egypt and the Mediterranean Sea. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of miles of 4-lane highways being installed right now. So somewhere the money is going to shift to, they need to restart the debt system. So everybody's got the idea that, okay, the system's going to collapse, but it'll never stay collapsed forever. That's the whole thing. Yeah, they might move the wealth from the Western nations into the developing nations, but for sure they want to keep that money pivoting train moving. So how do you do it? You need to reissue new debt in a new system. So if that Strauss and Howe book, The Fourth Turning, if nobody's read it, obviously you need to read it. It's like the base to let it understand where the new cycle begins and where the wealth is moving to and how things will be funded to allow the next fourth turning to unfold. It's starting in Africa, and I unequivocally, without a doubt, will go to my grave saying that Africa will be as wealthy as the United States.
During times of both prosperity and disparity, through the rise and fall of great dynasties and civilizations, gold has maintained its purchasing power as a reliable store of value for millennia. Gold has been used as money since 560 BC, when King Croesus of Lydia created a gold coin in his own image. Ever since, it has continued to increase its long-term value and remains the world's most universally accepted form of money. Today, the demand for gold continues to flourish globally. History proves that fiat paper money is designed to go to zero through inflation, whereas gold has intrinsic value in which it maintains forever. Paper money is a debt instrument. Gold is an asset of wealth in its own right. It does not depend upon any governments, corporations, or individuals' promise to repay. ITM Trading has spent the last 27 plus years developing a team of expert researchers and analysts to make this possible. Simply put, we build strategies which are historically proven to protect your wealth and assets through any economic downturn or currency collapse. Schedule your free gold and silver strategy call 866-834-1422. That's 866-834-1422. Or go to learn.itmtrading.com/MIAC and keep watching Mountain High Time and Mini Ice Age Conversations if you know what's good for you.
Norman Rockwell's Freedom from Want painting depicts one of the most peaceful scenes in American life as a family gathers around a holiday dinner table to give thanks, eat, talk, laugh, and share in an abundance of blessings. While this great American tradition will play out in the coming weeks, a hunger catastrophe is unfolding around the world, putting even the simplest of meals out of reach for a growing number of individuals and families around the world. Right now, nearly 1/3 of the world is food insecure, with over 828 million people going to bed hungry each night. 149 million children experience stunted growth and development due to a chronic lack of essential nutrients. As many as 50 million people in 45 countries are at immediate risk of famine, and more than 45 million children suffer from acute malnutrition or wasting, a devastating condition where a child's body is so starved of nutrients it begins to consume itself. These numbers are staggering, and behind every one of them is a real person. More than 44 million people in the U.S. face hunger, including 1 in 5 children. Millions of people in the U.S. don't have enough food to eat or don't have access to healthy food. This is a big problem, but together we can solve it. Although it isn't always obvious who is going without food or facing food insecurity, it might be your friend, your grandparents, or a coworker who is struggling to put food on the table. It could be a neighbor, the friendly elderly couple down the street. Maybe it's a single dad or mom who might need help. We all have tough times. That's why investing in emergency food storage is a must for you and your family's long-term safety net, but it can also be a life-saving gift. So in this giving season, you could help others by providing a helping hand to those in need of a little extra to make it through. As we always say, those who know what's coming are using today to prepare. American families are preparing. Folks are investing in emergency food storage. And you should be too, and you can start today with ADAPT 2030. Right now you can save $200 on a 3-month emergency food supply for yourself, or even better, for someone in need. Make this holiday season truly a happy one. My Patriot Supply, the country's largest preparedness company, is more than equipped to stock your shelves. Their best-selling 3-month emergency food kit provides delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners that last up.
Something you want to support, please consider a donation. Revolution Radio, you can go right to the donate tab, and they also have the QR codes right there for the crypto. Speaking of the Bitcoin citadels right before the break, many ways to support as we move into 2024. Perhaps they'll take ounces of silver too, but that might get confiscated in the mail. Smart mail deliverers might see that and whoosh, your envelope just disappeared. It's too heavy. It's a 1-ounce envelope. Now, just as we get started for the next segment here, like I say, traveling in Croatia, and we'd been here before in 2019 prior to the vid breaking out. And I wanted to just give you a couple of my ideas on how the society has forever changed and will never come back again. Now, a couple of the things that you have to think about here is, in the United States, if you're listening, our lockdowns, depending on which state you were not nearly as intense. Like here, they had fences up. And if you were not vaccinated, you were on that side of the fence. You were not allowed over here. You were not allowed in the stores to buy water or food or your daily necessities. They didn't give a shit if you died or lived. They really just didn't care. The fences were up, and it was hard pipe-hitting separation between those who did and those who didn't. And if you didn't, they wanted you to die anyway. And that's the way that this, and I couldn't believe that some of the signs were still up, even though for the New Year's of like, you non-vaccinated people have to stay on that side of the fence. If you step over, you will be instantly arrested. Like this is still on some of the signs that I'd seen out along the waterfront in Split when we were down there for New Year. And I was thinking, okay. So we have to go into it with that kind of recollection. And for us before, when we first came here, like walking through the old city, there's a bunch of little doorways, a bunch of little windows, and that's going to disrupt my broadcast every time a image gets sent. So mom and pops would cook food, or they would give you, they'd make their homemade rakia, and all the doors were open, and people's front windows were open, and you could just go buy something from a local family as you were walking along. Little door, like it'd be one door where you come into your house, but it would be open with a little table in front of it. None of that this time, all totally closed. The only thing left were the big chain bakeries and the big chain stores and the big chain restaurants. That's the only thing that survived through COVID here. And the people were so split along the vaccination cards or the not that they said, okay, you treated us so badly during that time, even though everything's been lifted now, we never in our lifetime will ever frequent your business ever again, ever. And we will tell our children, multi-generations in the future, never deal with your family, never deal with that store. So there's been even though everything's finished now, the memories of how horribly people were treated is now moving into the spending rift in the country where, yeah, people are never going to ever go into those stores or spend their money again in the restaurants, et cetera. And another thing I noticed really is the laughter is gone on the sidewalks and streets. But that was one of the coolest things is everywhere you went, you heard laughter. You heard, all kind of like fun talk and people just vivacious and living life. And it seems that the soul was sucked out. You just barely hear that on the streets anymore. And at the same time, a lot of people had started to order in, and there is something similar to like Uber Eats called Wolt, W-O-L-T, and they have the blue boxes on the back of their bikes and everything. If you sit in a restaurant, like we like to sit around and have macchiato and just chill out and, sit on the street side cafe and just watch life go by, you'll see 30 or 40 of the Wolts go by in half an hour. Like the whole thing was there was such a social culture before, where people, if you wanted to go out and you wanted to buy anything, you had to take your body out and go do it and go have cafe and all. But I'm seeing a huge, massive amount of people have just decided to order in, and the same thing goes. I will never go back into your cafe. I will never go back into your restaurant. I will never, ever again touch your bakery. I will order anything outside of your sphere of me ever giving you a penny of money again because how horribly you treated my family or me because we weren't vaccinated. So it seems like there's a huge amount of ordering from this Wolt company like a Uber Eats. And it was never like that. People always went out to go get their dailies. And here's another thing, too. Like this coin-operated coffee machine. I mean, if you would have put one of those in this place, you would have been laughed out of the streets by putting a coin-operated coffee machine in the street. Like, what? Damn, dude, there's 50 cafes over here. What are you talking to coin-operated? But now you see these coin-operated cafes everywhere, where it's like €1, you plop it in, and then like a Nescafe thing pops out. But again, it's that same separation of society. Everybody was so 6 foot apart and you couldn't go to cafes, but everybody needed their coffee. So now there's hundreds, thousands of these coin-operated little kiosks. But again, somebody will drop €1 in there and they won't go to the coffee shop. And it just, again, it separates that society thing where there's less human interaction to keep a society tight again. And I'm looking at it, it was super nefarious the way our world was broken apart because Croatia was very, 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 very tight as a society. And the damage done during COVID and the way it was shattered from within, it's so clear to see the plan on how to destroy a society within the society, to have the people turn on themselves. And then after that, turning is done, nothing ever re-repairs itself, and the old norms continue to stick, even that, although everything goes back to normal again. So anyway, I thought I would throw that out there for you, and the same rules apply. Only the big bakeries were left. Only the big restaurants were allowed to open, and those are the only ones left. So there's been a definite, drastic, very noticeable shift in the society here. So if you've seen it in America, you're not special. It's happened everywhere, but here it just, it hurts my heart to see. This is one of my favorite countries, and just the vivaciousness of living and enjoying life and just expressing that through laughter and sort of thing. People don't want to get close anymore after this COVID thing. It might take a couple generations to come back. It will in the future, but for right now, the world's experiencing the same kind of trauma-based mind control. So that's how I'll start the episode here, Ransom. Oh, your microphone's on, or your mic's muted. Okay, Ransom, I'll wait till you come back. Just unmute the mic when you hit back into the studio here.
The world of yesteryear.
That's
funny.
The world of yesteryear. It's like we're looking at a 1930s
as a social
movie.
Experiment, you should pick out any of your favorite 80s. I'm muted?
No, you're good to go. Sorry, go ahead. Now you're muted again. Unmute and then continue with the 80s.
Sorry, I was on the wrong headset, so I was delayed. That's it. Sorry about that. No, I was saying as a social experiment, think about any of your favorite 80s movies. And, in that movie, they'll show the character and he'll go outside or for whatever reason, and you get to meet the neighbors because everybody knew their neighbors back in the day, right? So it didn't matter where you live, New Mexico, California, New York, Philadelphia, Detroit, whatever. In the 80s, you knew who your neighbors were. And then it progressively got to where, people were uncomfortable to go outside and talk to their neighbors. And then it became, less about knowing who your neighbors are at all because people would die and they would leave their property to their offspring or the bank got it or whatever. So neighborhoods started changing and then strangers would move in. And then, we got this whole phenomenon where you didn't even talk to your neighbors. And then fast forward to, what you're talking about, the lockdowns around the world that fundamentally changed and transformed the world. And you were mentioning some things that happened here, like where I live. All the mom and pops restaurants were hurting. I mean, they were, really messing with them about wearing extra garments, about putting up little walls that, obviously were cartoonish and wouldn't stop anything at the registers. They made, people do curb pickup. They reinforced that idea that interacting with society is dangerous to you, right? And then they even give you the little distance that you should keep away from people. And more than half of the population, at least, believe that hook, line, and sinker, the whole mentality of it. And then when you look at what really happened, not the social part of it, but what happened as far as the reality of it, the only things that stayed open were the big chain stores. And what did they do? They cut the amount of products they had. At least where I live, I know they cut the products, they shortened the shelves, and then they cut the hours in half. Now, what does that do? Well, it allows them to not pay a lot of people anymore. It also allows them to only be open for certain hours of the day. And if you really think about it, they're moving you into that kind of society. And I have pointed out, they're opening up AI restaurants and AI workers, that will stock things faster, better, etc. I guess that's open to, opinion there. But the numbers won't argue. And the whole world is set up in this just-in-time business model. So whenever things go bad, people are going to be clamoring for things to return. So when they return, they're not going to come in the same format as you're used to. Like, for example, dictators don't raise armies so much anymore and invade countries. Now the invasion comes through suits, ties, negotiations, and legalese. And that has been furthering that whole idea, along with the, recent change in behavior. So now when you go outside, there's an added fear of, desperation. There's a fear of people, worried about getting sick from other people. And I saw in the headlines, of course, there's new variants. There's a plethora of reasons why there's going to be a lot of vote-in ballot voting this year, or for the election this time. So, when people are scratching their heads, they're no telling what happened. It's so convoluted and complicated now with robots involved, algorithms, and nefarious people. You can't trust anything you see, hear, or read. And then later you find out that, of course, 50 or more % of whatever you heard was in fact wrong. And then, the whole society is now set up where you are supposed to fear people, right? There's mass shootings, there's crime on the rise, there's this, there's that. Instead of promoting the ideas that have traditionally worked, which is communion with your local neighborhood, to know who they are, to work with them, to help each other out when sometimes people are doing bad. But that whole world's gone. That was the world where each individual house probably had someone in it that had their very own job and their very own trade that was unlike everyone else. Like I knew a guy that worked on radios. I knew a guy that made boots. That is almost completely disappeared. Not only from the service industry, like, if I had a pair of boots and I wanted them sewed, depending on what town you live in, you're just not going to find anybody that does that. Some of the towns across America still have people that refuse to participate, and they stayed open, or at least that they saved their money so they could reopen, or they had a situation where the circumstances weren't hurting them. But those are far and few between. And when you look at it now, we've almost had a complete takeover by several different parties simultaneously. So you have the bankers buying up all the properties, the real estate companies that work hand in hand with those bankers. And then on the other end of things, you've had the box stores completely take over the food market to the point where that's all there is. Like, so where I live, you can name a chain. We probably have the top 10 of those, and there's only 2 grocery stores, and those 2 grocery stores only provide 2 choices each. So it is almost literally like shopping at the government store. I'm surprised that the labels and everything are not just black and white, kind of like the USDA cheese, crackers, and honey bears. And think about that for the 80s, the good times when the government actually helped feed people that were in need instead of giving them a digital soup kitchen card to go down and, buy things that are food-like stuffs that are at the grocery store. So even before people realize that there is a problem with shipping and the amount of food that is coming in and available, they would have already had 5 or 6 years of, straight diet of these food-like stuffs where they didn't notice. But I noticed because we only buy certain things. I know that the price of butter has skyrocketed. The price of eggs has skyrocketed. Meat has skyrocketed. All of the real foods is gone up in price. The ones that are kind of secretive, weirdly in today's world, like, the staples that everybody was used to, beans, rice, etc. When you go look for those in big packages, they're gone. People are figuring out what's going on, certain people, and other people are just left in the dark playing catch up. And unfortunately, I think, and then now we're at $34 trillion in debt. The bubble has to pop. We have so many bubbles going on that are aligning with this transition of world governance. And that's what we're seeing. And I don't think that there's going to be any other outcome than all parties agreeing to have a communist capitalist society that's a crony capital society that's only run from the top, that only supports the elite, and they will decide what your opinions are, where you will bank, where you will eat, where you will shop. And it's almost like that now. And now we're finding out the amount of technology in the background that they're using to complete this. And that goes with all kinds of, there's no other word for it, but brainwashing, or maybe brain directing to have a certain opinion, buy a certain product or not. I talk to people that think that eating from a garden is disgusting. And they're like, ew, you got that from outside? Isn't there like bugs and dirt on it? I hate to tell you, that's way better than the stuff that's all over your food at the supermarket.
My favorite yummy after coating of my fresh vegetables would be A-peel. Can't get enough of that stuff. Thanks, Bill. So tasty. Even though you say it's tasteless, odorless, you can still smell it on the product. I guess the nasal, I should be a perfume tester, I guess. But that's just me. And, the cutting of the products, there was an article on Zero Hedge. I don't have it pulled up right here, but that was the whole crux of the article, was how stores have, for 2024 and 23, just stopped carrying so many choices. And they talked about candle companies cutting, and the amount in the food companies, instead of 32 types of products, they cut down to 16. And, who carries Red Bull, and I forget, like Coca-Cola, they had 32 products, and some of these beer and beverage companies, they had 40 products, but now they're just cutting 20 of them, and they're trying to nurture the other 20. So think about all those small businesses that survived through COVID that were still being held by Coca-Cola as, product line number 39, makes steady money, not really growing, but then suddenly, after you survive the COVID, you got your business back up and running, and then Coca-Cola cuts those top, or the low 50% of all the products. And it's not just like Coca-Cola. It's the huge amount of things, from the Home Depot, which would give you less choices for your home, Bed Bath and Beyond. There's a couple of those other ones that like Hobby Lobby and a few others, cutting extreme choices out of there. And again, these candle companies, we can do with 42 cents versus, different scented candles. We don't need 120. And they keep coming back to, people don't want that many choices. And plus our overhead's getting crushed by trying to carry just, one different scent that comes out in a certain holiday that we need to retool our entire line for. But they're telling you in advance that they're cutting the choices because you don't want the choice. Again, it's like the tail wagging the dog on that. Who says they don't want the choice? It's just society's now telling them that there's going to be less choices. And mark my words, there will be. And if you start to see that trend, which Ransom and I are talking about, that's a line on the trend. So if you were to come out and see okay, a dot moving that direction in 2024, there's going to be less products available. Okay, so then you could look at the Red Sea and say, all right, well, that 3-week delay in shipping, yeah, that's going to have some knock-on effects in ordering systems. Even if they're using AI, feeder vessels aren't going to, hit that main, departure date, and then you're waiting another 6 weeks on top of the 3 weeks. AI can do its best, but feeder vessels in the real world, you either miss the ship, literally, you miss the boat, so pun intended there. But then you look at those types of things. We're in earnest. A full Zero Hedge article talking about how companies are now cutting massive amounts of product with giving you far, 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 far less choice. And that's just a trend that's going to continue. When you start to look and see some of the supermarkets are running thin on things anyway. Well, now you add in all that, and that's 2 dots there that correlate into, okay, that's a little bit larger dot because we now have 2 very clean stories pointing to the same metric of, well, less goods available in 2024 in your store shelves. So get ready for that, prepare it. And then I'm sure a few other articles are going to pop out during this time. And, you talked about homes being bought and sold in neighborhoods. Another article that was out earlier for the wrap up of 2024, 55% of all residential home purchases were done by Vanguard, BlackRock, and Blackstone. It wasn't people buying the house that you might not know your neighbor. They're going to be renters. So if you look at all the home purchases in 2023 and you think, man, there was a lot of real estate bought and sold and prices are up and prices are crashing, prices are sideways, it doesn't matter. 55% of all homes in America bought and sold were bought and sold by investment companies. Not me and you as a family that needs a house, but by Vanguard and BlackRock. This whole world being gobbled up by corporations where you're going to have to re-rent everything under their rules. I don't like that, nor should anybody else. But here's a good one. Since we've been speaking about global government, and this is another one off of Zero Hedge, one of my favorite sites here. 2024, the year global government takes shape. And again, the first sentence starts off here: total control of every aspect of life for every single person on the planet. That's the goal. So when you come to the misnomer of global government, it's the misnomer. There never will be, as you know, a global government, air quotes, quote unquote, because then you could overthrow it. You could organize against it. So it's going to be a global governance structure. So for sure, let's talk about a couple of these things here. They're not going to declare themselves as this is now your one world government. That will never, ever happen, ever. Because again, once you have something to point the fingers at, it's just going to be a bunch of suggestions. They're never going to abolish nationhood either. You can't. You need that national or the national divide to continue to fund the wars, to continue to point the finger at those people causing the problems. There's never going to be a one world and suddenly you wake up and like on the news one day they say, hey, you know what? There's no more borders. It's a world utopia. That is never going to happen either. So you can just mark those 2 things off your, oh, this is what's going to happen when we get to the global governance or global government. Nope, they won't declare themselves and they're never going to abolish borders. There's never going to be an overt declaration of the change of the old system to the new system, because you will know that they have changed or in the process of changing systems. So we're going to get this overt change that Ransom and myself talk about every week here. Is there's new models that are ongoing and incrementally introduced at a nonstop rate. Sometimes it's faster, sometimes it's slower, but it's continuous change. And they're coming into a monosystematic skeleton of our previous world where there will be only one, the Highlander model. That's pretty, and it's a great way to do it. Instead of saying, one world government, you could say a Highlander model of governance, something like that. I mean, like he kept talking about communism, socialism, democracy, monarchies, capitalism, tyrannies, all squished into one thing. I don't know. They're going to try I call it different farming methods. They're going to try to blend all of these farming methods into the Highlander model. So again, what they put is these different types of methods that might be distributed across the planet, but I think they're going to be a hybridization of all munched on top of each other, mashed together as mashed potatoes, and they're going to try their best to divide using the system, conquer using the system, and economically dominate using the same system. Because if you can, like I say, it would be a meld of capitalism, but wait, it's a monarchy. Oh, wait, it's unelected officials controlling the capitalism and controlling the financial markets. Wait, with a little bit of communism to control the serfs, with the socialism, and then, we can wrap it in under the guise of democracy. You see, oh, wait, we're already here. Like, you see what I mean? We're already here. This is just the consolidation for the final phase on grip of power. And the rough model can only work if all sovereign powers are truly just in name only. So you think the president of the United States? Nope, there is none. It's just like a vestigial, as they would say here, a vestige, or just like a phantom of itself behind. There's really no power behind it. It's just like a front puppet. Really, the real power lies behind the governance structure. It does bring us into what digital money, digital ID, and then the whole climate action thing to wrap it all into. So the digital money, CBDCs, that way they can control how you spend, but you're going to need the digital ID to put all your birth information and all your driver's license information. It's so secure for you, your retinal print, your fingerprint. Also, you can access the digital money system. So you see how cleverly they wrap those two together. Now, fast track it when we get into food, when it gets a little less or a little more expensive, a little less available. Heaven forbid we get into a war where we get into rationing. Oh, wait, that's how they would fast track everybody, wouldn't they? You need a digital rationing card. Oh, wait, now you can use the digital money for free. We know you can't earn the money, so government gives you the money. As long as you have the digital ID, see, they're going to wrap you in a super fast track. Now, the last thing is the climate action, because this is the never-ending boogeyman that can be used for everything. And this is truly the thing that ties it in. And I never understood why my channel was so shadow banned all the time when me and Christian started talking about how the grabbing of the food supply across the world would be tied to your actions, your words, all wrapped into the digital ID. And when Christian started talking, I haven't heard from him in ages. I've been reaching out and I haven't heard from him. But Christian, if you're listening, yeah, man, stay safe out there and keep hiding, because I know a few people are looking for you. Run, rabbit, run. The climate action is the thing that is, like I say, the never-ending boogeyman, because this is truly how they do it. They keep they'll keep talking about the interoperability and what's that? The consideration design. They're going to always have something out there that's going to be from the World Economic Forum. That's a coordinated, climate action committee, climate action committee, and humans are not evolved enough to solve this or even wrap their heads around it. So we have to be in control of all of it. And they're never going to come out with a global governance structure and say, yes, we're the global government. We're going to do this and charge a global tax because we're the global government. All they're going to do is keep saying projections and think tanks and keep moving you through on these different issues. You're going to be forced, but you won't know you're forced. So they're going to keep throwing this thing. And really, as we see it now in 2024, energy and transport are the first things to be affected. Well, that was always the plan, to limit your amount of travel, to limit the consumption of the amount of gallons of fuel you use, the limit of your transportation outside the electric grid system or your compliance, because we could turn off your electric car, and your reward as a good obedient citizen to allow you to transport or move or travel. Anybody can do that with a fossil fuel driven car that's off a computer system that can't be shut down. Now, the whole thing is they want to enter a global carbon tax, but so far they've run up against a bunch of headwinds on this. People that with any half of a brain can go back in the climate record and look and go, wait, that climate gate thing, they cooled the past to make it look like it was a continuous warming. Although they cut down the heat spike, in the 1930s, and they made it substantially up to 0.4 of a degree cooler, some areas 0.6 of a degree cooler, to make that area in the Dust Bowl in the 1930s drop way down in temperature, because they wouldn't let you to see an equivalent heat spike back in the 1930s. That'd be like a centennial thing, 100-year cycle. So they cooled the pass considerably to make it look that since the 1850s, look, it's just trending up and up and up. Nothing's ever, it's just us making. But that was the whole thing about climate gate emails, is how all of these scientists in unison with their academies and with their institutions came together to absolutely do fraud inside the climate record for the agenda to push forth to get a global carbon tax. Now, the more they pushed this agenda, the higher they were paid. And if you didn't do that, you lost your funding. So the only people still really left in the climate game are those calling it out that were disenfranchised and removed out of their positions because they would not kowtow to the new system. And they're still in there fighting, trying to make people aware. Or the ones who had said, you know what, I'm not even going to try to fight it. I worked my whole life so far, and I got a family to feed, and I got a house payment. And you know what, I don't care what I say. As long as I get my money, I just don't care. Those type of people are still, and unfortunately, are now the heads of all the institutions. There's no more no yes man in there. Everybody's a yes man in the higher institutions that are participating in the climate change, from the COP28 to your local university, your local high school professor, or your local high school science teacher. They are all completely in agreement that they will only preach the climate gospel or they will lose their jobs. So they'll say whatever they want. They need a paycheck. Now, here's the whole thing about that. How does it work? Well, there's going to be an impartial international climate change expert committees that will then give suggestions to governments on how they would recommend government policy change. There'll never be somebody at the top on the top global government pointing a finger and go, you know what, you're going to change that. Everybody's only going to be able to fly 1,000 miles this year and make it so. Make it so, number one. It's never going to be like that. The way they're going to do it is continuously use the guise of climate change. I'll say it again, impartial international climate change experts that will then recommend policy to every single nation, and it will be the exact same policy, and all nations will move into action unanimously like they did with COVID. And this will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised, nor will the awareness of global government, because once you know you got bait and switched into a new system and you got hooked into a new money and you've lost these freedoms, then what? Then people are going to get super angry and they're going to be like, no, we don't want to do that. But who do you go after? Everything's so distributed at that point. It's across every nation. It's across every institution, from universities all the way down. It's across all governments. It's across all sectors of learning and finance. Where would you even start to cut off the head of Medusa there? That's the whole thing. They make it so difficult. Now it's so distributed that there is none, but it all operates with the dictates of just a couple at the top. So anyway, I think you got my idea there, Ransom. I'm going to leave it and let you ramble on that, chew on that fat, if you will. I think that's going to be grub fat or caterpillar fat. Either one, we could chew on that kind of fat.
You, right? I think you're exactly right. And that's kind of what I've been saying. And like, it's an amalgamation of all the isms put together, smushed together, because they were all created by the same people. I mean, think about, if you know your history, we kind of financed Mao, we financed Stalin, we set up the bad guy, and you're exactly right. They'll never get rid of the facade of the nation state, but what they will do is gut it. They'll gut the sovereignty of it. They'll gut the production of it. They'll gut the identity of it. And that's the plan going forward, obviously, an amalgamation of all the isms under the centralized control of an invisible world government. And I think that goes into why you're seeing all of these elites buying bunkers, moving to the south of the planet down there. They're buying armored redoubts. It's the same reason, which is funny because and I don't know, maybe it's not going to happen because of kind of a ego. But the royal family was talking about, abjugating the throne and kind of disappearing into the background with one of the world's biggest supplies of gold, right? But instead, Mama died, and you got the new king, and he seems to be on board with the climate cult. Matter of fact, everything comes out of his mouth is about that, and he's down with the depopulation agenda in full. And this is where you're going to see the real design of the Great Reset, or at least the aftermath of that. And what it is a technocratic feudalist system where you have little governors in areas controlling that and enforcing the world governance. True, you're only going to have the facade of independent nation states, but the governance will be world governance. And we already saw that with the pandemic. We saw the extent of world governance when it came to that. Every nation on this planet participated in that program in one way or another. Only a few people spoke out against it in each nation. And, well, we know what happened to when you spoke out against that. So I think what that was is just a really small beta test of how easy it is to segregate the elite and the common man into two different, two-tiered of justice system, a totally separate and definitely not equal group of people. The elite that continue to go out and party and go on vacation and drink, including right here in the communist state of New Mexico, where our governor would have, people open up just to cut her hair, and the jewelry shop open up so she could shop for a few things because she's our governor, our little queenship. It's the feudalist system. Well, everybody else had to shut down, and everybody else had a curfew, basically, travel bans, which I did not follow because, nowhere in the Constitution did it say that she had the power to do that. And they're claiming these emergency powers to take away from the sovereignty of a nation and the laws in there, saying, well, that's great, but none of that counts because we have emergencies we have to deal with. And matter of fact, recently, in that same line of thinking, our dictatorship decided that she would curtail the Second Amendment under the same concept, a health emergency that she needed to deal with. And we've seen this with many governors. And that's the end result of what this is. It's a technocratic top-down system that on the bottom end for the common man, you're going to get to see the old school feudalism of Europe back in the day, where you had a kingship and then there were lords, and we'll just call them different stuff like governors, city managers, and they'll enforce these world edicts and this world governance upon the locals, despite their local constitutions, despite electing supposedly people in that would represent them. When they get in office, they still go with the main thing. And that tells you how powerful it is that every single politician, it seems, that says one thing, once they get elected or they take an office, they go ahead and side with the other set of ideas that you were opposed to. And that's what we're going to see. But think about this, is in the future, no one will even know where these edicts are coming from, because the program will be so big that you won't know how it's trickling down. All you'll know is what your local authoritative sources of information and authority tell you need to do and tell you how it's going to be. And they practice that worldwide just now. So it's not beyond imagination that any or every emergency from here forward, including but not limited to world war, further pandemics, any kind of natural disaster, just for example, let's go woo-woo for a minute. And I'm not saying this is going to happen by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a possibility. Say we keep kicking the can to about 2029, and everybody keeps arguing about global warming and whose idea of the afterlife we're going to respect, or all of those things just thrown in there, gender ideologies or arguments, all of the arguments that they give you of our time, consuming the populations. While in the backdrop, you have the most powerful elite people and organizations on the planet preparing for some kind of doomsday. They're not making these vaults with regular heirloom seeds and genetics from everyone, stockpiling genetics from not only extinct animals but living ones, stockpiling human beings, individuals that lived on the world, storing their genetic information. They're not buying these armored bunkers because they don't think nothing's going to happen. They're doing it because they can feel it or they know about it. And that's something that's down the road. But let's say we just kick the can and everybody's doing that in the background, and then this rock named Apophis swings by and hits the first time. Or maybe it does just hit the keyhole in 2029 and swing back around in 2032 and demolish everything. Do you think you could adapt to 2032 in that scenario? Because what we're talking about is something that has probably happened to mankind before, at least on some level, maybe not exactly a giant rock, but they've had the repercussions of giant volcanoes, tsunamis, worldwide floods, things like that. And somehow different forms of humans came out the other end to accomplish what, seems amazing, but probably not the first time. And that's the civilization we have now of human beings now. But it's not beyond belief that the elites, all the way back in those times before the deluge, knew about it. In fact, we have writings that suggest exactly that there weren't just, people caught off guard. Some people knew that there was an impending doom about to happen. We have religions based on that idea. We have temples like Göbekli Tepe that seem to be some kind of new library to consolidate information and knowledge of the time in fear that it might be completely lost and erased again. And so you bring us back to now, and now you got all of these elite people working on all these problems. We have people up in space playing with asteroids. So keep that in mind. We have companies that are not telling governments which asteroids they're trying to get on in mind because they don't want the competition to know. And then you have governments that seem to have their finger itchy on the trigger, wanting to use some of the older nuclear technology so we could phase into a whole unrecognizable world. I don't think that there's any shortage of these fundamental transformations all happening at once. But the end result will be a technocratic feudalist system. And guess what? To throw a little much more on the woo-woo, at this point in technology, they don't even need you. And that might be the mistake of our time, is assuming that the elite and the governments, the continuity of governments and the powers that be actually need you or care what's going to happen to you. They may just need you to get in an orderly single file line for the ending. They may have, and I put to you that they do, because I've now seen it, they've admitted to it, enough technology to restart a civilization without any of your opinions. From scratch, they can set up, think about it. You can have 30 people run a facility that's growing like 3,500 babies. You could build 100 of these, 1,000 of these, and in just 20 years, you would have a big workforce of cities ready to go, startups, if you will. People are naive enough to think that they actually care what the mass billions on this planet are, the fate of them. But they do tell us exactly what they want to happen. And that's a reduction of all of us to the point where these transhuman elites can play God on planet and own vast swaths of land where people live in it in a feudalist society. And that's what we're fighting. And, a lot of people say we're in dark times. It's a spiritual war. In a sense, absolutely, it is a spiritual war. It's people that have seemingly no conscience and no soul that have rose to the top of the power structures of the world, telling us that we're the ones that need to disappear and go.
Well, I ain't going. So don't book me a ticket, my friend. Thanks. You can give that ticket to somebody else. And speaking of Göbekli Tepe, one of the reasons I came back to Croatia was to look at the boulder deposition / rock composition from the Adriatic heading inland. Because I do remember last time, as we were driving a bus, hopping a bus, I like to travel by bus along the coast because the train doesn't go along the coast, but the bus does. Huge giant windows, everything's super plush, super nice, And what I noticed the first time I came here was the boulders that were going up from the Adriatic Sea, up at just all exactly the same composition, round and mountains made of these same exact rocks, almost like it was melted, and then on top of that, it was strewn with these boulders of equidistant, circumference size. So to take a look, if this was a plasma discharge on the planet, interplanetary plasma discharge on the planet, through the Adriatic, which was once not a sea, but the Mediterranean may have been there, but somehow interplanetary lightning came and sculpted out the Adriatic Sea. With that wind pattern called an ionic wind, that it would separate everything chemically, because the chemical separation or the atomic separation is based on the electrical frequency. And if you were to have that charge pattern and that wind going out at some 700 to 1,000 plus miles an hour, everything would be carried in the same sizes out until the wind dissipated. So here at the strike pattern along the Adriatic Sea, you would have these multi-ton round boulders by the trillions laying around, creating mountain faces. And if it was hot enough in some areas, it would be totally molten and would have become one solid mass like I see. But then on top of that, you're seeing this unbelievable amount of very similarly sized round boulders just strewn across the landscape. But if you head further inland, they become smaller in size, but they're still the exact same phenomenon. They were being carried by a supersonic ionic wind, sculpted, and the density and the heaviness of the minerals, obviously like a grain, a granule would form in different sizes and densities and heaviness. So what I'm saying with what I saw last time and what I'm seeing this time more is that Göbekli Tepe was at the far, far end of where the ionic wind had reached from the blast pattern here on the Adriatic Sea. And, all the stories are the same. Anytime you study Göbekli Tepe, they're like, the infill was perfect. It was like they mined the sand, and then they shifted or sifted it through screens, and everything was exactly the same size. That's why they thought it was buried by humans, because some sort of mining operation where they would have screen sifted it, and all the grains were exactly the same circumference, exactly the same size. And they really did think that humans were the ones that had refilled in Göbekli Tepe, and then had enough extra time and energy to build the top of a mountain to also fill it in with that exact same strata, size of granules, and then just basically sculpt the top of a mountain so you wouldn't even know that site was under the mountain. But if it were an ionic wind blowing, and that's where the end distribution pattern was, so instead of seeing a 10-ton boulder here or a 20-ton boulder on the side of the Adriatic where the strike pattern was, where that blew literally off out 20, 30 miles from the strike pattern at 20 tons. Imagine if it was a grain of sand like what you're used to on grains of sand on the beach, but that was some 800 miles going over to Göbekli Tepe. 1,200 miles that direction is where the final winds and the final debris would have sifted out and fallen out of the atmosphere. That explains your burial of all the perfection of the infill in Göbekli Tepe. And Göbekli Tepe is just one of the sites. There are 3 more sites that they have found within 12 kilometers or about 6 miles of that area that the kids all knew about. They all played when they were kids. There's underground, reservoirs, underground passageways, etc. And they're starting to uncover a few more. And now they're wondering, are these things interconnected under the ground? But how history is always so murky, they never really push forward with a lot of the discoveries because it would rewrite history as you understand it. Because Göbekli Tepe as itself is a find, okay, that redefines history itself. But to find multiple sites that were dated with Göbekli Tepe, but then connected underground through tunnel systems, that defies logic on even the ability for the technological advancement of the society. You have to scale it up a 10x. And then what are the artifacts that they would find in these tunnels if they really start getting under there to do a lot of the research? Like, would they find anti-gravity technologies? You talked about, room temperature chips, room temperature. I wrote that note down. Hold on a second here. Yeah, room temperature. That would be electrogravitics or free energy for levitation at room temperature. I mean, we're going to find some floating craft that have just you press the button and it turns on, and they had that 10,000 years ago. I mean, were they trying to hide also? Because think about that. If the elite today are hiding with our best technology underground, can you imagine if the society coming out of the Atlanteans, pre-Younger Dryas, understood that same phenomena was inbound, and they came with their best tech and went into the quote-unquote underground bunkers of their day, and they had, floating Vimanas and this sort of thing, and then suddenly whoosh, an ionic wind comes and buries every entrance and exit way out of their bunker, like hundreds of feet deep. There's no way to even blast out of there, even if you could even move the sand to the next place. What would they find in 10,000 years in our bunkers? Like if you, in the future, 10,000 years, were an archaeologist and busted into one of our, say, Bill Gates' bunker or Jeff Bezos's bunker under New Zealand, and 10,000 years had elapsed, and you cracked in there, would our technology now be super more advanced than what they would be experiencing? Because there would be a huge, gigantic setback in humanity, and then it would all start over again, sticks, carving on rocks. Eventually you find fire, and that whole thing reboots itself. So, just do the overlay in time, overlay in cycles. A bunker is a bunker, whether it's an underground city or whether it's a paid for reinforced door type of thing that we see with the multi-billionaires of our planet. I don't know. There's a lot of questions to ask. And I will say one thing about the star forts that I've been cruising around here. There's, the city of Split itself is a star fort. When I say star fort, I mean a massive, unbelievably large, huge city-size area of a star fort. But within that, there are multiple walls of the previous fortification, which were star forts inside the star fort, inside the star fort. One of them now is the Maritime Museum. But when you cruise along the walls, you get different glimpses of history. Like right where the edges come together, you get two walls that come out to a 45-degree point. The workmanship on that, some places is modern stone cutting, and you can see the chisel marks and the tool marking on it. But other place, that stuff looks thousands of years old, and it's still just as perfect. But when you go either side of where the reinforced points of the two walls come together, you start to see some areas that had the original inlaid blocks where you can't even put a sheet of paper between them, into what you consider where they tried to repair it 500 years ago, which weren't the same size blocks, but they were still pretty large, into the more modern kind of stuff where it just looks like a kindergartner put together compared to. And that's kind of the study I'm doing right now over here. And I'm going to, for those of you over at Patreon, I'll be putting out a bunch of this research here over the next week, especially with the star forts and the walls and the reconstruction. And what was cool is my wife and I, we were up taking some photos in the morning of this one kind of remoter section. Hardly anybody goes back in there. And this guy's like 75 years old, and he didn't speak really much English, but he's like, hey, come here. But I knew he wasn't yelling at us. He was trying to tell us, come here. So then he points at this one section in the wall, and he goes, Yugoslav army. When I was a child, we played football here, and there's an entrance right in here. They covered it up. It's a tunnel system here, different tunnels. And he's like, Yugoslav army, and we play kids as football and stuff. But he showed us where one of the old entrances was, and if you didn't know it was there, you'd think it was just sloppy repairmanship. But once you knew that there was an entrance to a separate tunnel system that is now covered up, then wow, what are we looking at here in terms of time? But anyway, Ransom, take us out, man. I just thought I would start blasting on the different layers of time that I'm seeing in front of me on stone carving workmanship. I see 3 distinct periods of time in the stones in front of me.
Right. That's kind of what you see everywhere in the ancient world. You see somebody that could make some really big, nice cut stuff, and then you see other people coming and building the same or trying to copy it on the same spot, which is funny because I've been searching the Chinese landscape for all of the pyramids, and I'm building a Google file map with the location of all of them. And I'm realizing they're all in a specific line, and it was a massive city that's really being underplayed. And this is what even archaeologists are saying, an 8,000-year-old, site. I think it might be a little bit older than that. I think what you're seeing maybe is a younger Dryas era city that got wiped off the map, because when you look at it, it's right between the mouth of it's in a Y of rivers. So whoever was living there, you can just imagine with all these pyramids everywhere and the houses and all of the other infrastructure that must have been around it that's no longer there. Like it's just totally gone. All you see is the remnants of these pyramids that, by the way, are the same style as the Egyptian thing, with the very top stone missing or the top part gone. So, a lot of people say there was a capstone. There might not have ever been a capstone, because it's a sacred geometry spot and an idea. It's pretty weird. So, and you're talking about all of these other things. I think we're at the point where so many things are being uncovered that they have to put the cork back in the bottle. And that's part of this cycle that we're ending right now.
I can help you with your research. When I was living in China and working there, I went to Shenyang and I was studying and visited a bunch of the pyramids also. This is way back, like before the Olympics, like 2005, 6. Like there was nobody out there, and checking out the little museums of what stuff they've excavated out of the tombs, which are now pyramids. And yeah, man, I'll send you off some of the photos so we can compare notes, because that was my thing. Jumping across the Chinese pyramids. Anyway, next week we'll talk to you. Ransom Godwin, David DuByne signing off here, Revolution Radio, Studio A. 10 p.m. to midnight, Thursday night. See you next week. Make sure you sign up for our show notes. OilSeedDrops.org. MIAC show notes.